Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Music Rating, Ranking, and Reviewing podcast we like to call Music Meltdown, which this episode, Alex is back, and I'm going to be following him up on something he said in the lovely Taylor Swift video that you edited for me. Thank you very much. In which you claimed that the singer of this band is, I could be wrong, but I believe verbatim, the best male pop singer of the last 20 years, which you don't need to answer this now, but we will get to it in time. And I want you to test that theory. And that singer, of course, is Brendan Urie from the track Me by Taylor Swift. And that is the only thing that he has ever done. No, of the band Panic at the Disco. Panic at the Disco, I got into music through the kind of emo pop punk crowd. So they were definitely on the periphery of that. Actually, the second band I think I ever got into, I am a pretty big Panic fan. Even when I was sort of getting into other music and trying to drift away from the scene, my affection and my love of Panic has really persisted throughout. And I'll lay it out there, regardless of how cool or uncool it is, they're probably a top 50 artist for me. I really love them a lot. Although I'll admit, very flawed group, very flawed frontman, just as a person, but I have a lot of love and a lot of affection and just a ton of nostalgia towards them. So, Alex, where are you coming in regards to Panic at the Disco?
Panic at the Disco. Um, I have an interesting relationship with this band, I think. Um I feel like I came into like my formative years of like pop music listening were when Panic was arguably at their biggest in like the mid 2010s or so. So I was surrounded by their influence and by their music a lot. And I always had a somewhat positive opinion of them. I don't think I ever disliked Panic. Um, what the quote that you attributed to me about Brendan Urie being the best male pop singer of the last 20 years, I am going to still stand by that, um, especially after listening to this catalog again. Well, I shouldn't say especially after, but I will say I don't think that's a super high bar because I don't think there's a whole lot of incredible technical talents in male pop singing in recent years. But I think he has a very I love his power, I love his tone, and we'll certainly be talking about that in some of these album reviews. But I do stand by that opinion. My familiarity with the records is that I'd heard all of them except for the most recent one. I was familiar with all of them, so not intimately with certain songs, but I'd heard all of them at least once prior to this. So this was revisiting, and overall, it was a positive experience. So I think compared to Adrian, I'm not going to be probably quite as positive. I think it's going to be kind of a role reversal from Taylor Swift in that sense, but I think we're going to come out of this with some pretty like the end of this video will have some pretty positive things from both of us is my take.
Absolutely. I will say I'm probably not as head over heels for Panic as you are for Taylor, but I still do have a lot of love for Panic at the Disco. And yeah, I was actually just thinking it over, but before we got into this, like before you joined and everything, about that claim, it's like there really haven't been a lot of male pop singers within the last couple of decades, really. Like the last truly massive male pop singer is like Ed Sheeran, who sucks. And then before that, I struggle to think of like a big one. The last name that I'm really going to is like Usher, but there's definitely people in between then.
Bieber.
What was that?
Bieber.
Oh yeah, I forgot he existed.
Yeah. And actually I don't think Bieber's a bad singer,
I was gonna
honestly.
say
I
so.
I think he's a decent singer. And
Mhm.
Ed Sheeran, one day maybe we'll get to that. I've been trying to convince you to do an Ed Sheeran Music Meltdown episode for a while now, but I will say the appeal of him to me is not his singing voice necessarily.
If it is his eclecticism, that is the thing that makes me hate Sheeran the most. So I hope it is not that.
I I would not describe him as eclectic.
I think he tries to be. Emphasis on tries, but
Exactly. Yeah. He
yes,
tries to be, but he fails. Hence, he is not eclectic.
that is true. Maybe. Time will tell.
Yeah.
I will say we will do Nickelback before we do Sheeran, though. And we'll do the fucking Bee Gees before we do Sheeran. I swear, every time we do an episode, Bee Gees gotta get brought up. Shouts to Robin Gibb. But
Rest
anyways,
in peace.
sure. On to the catalog. I'll kick this off. 7 records. I mean, let's be real, really only like 4 records, but we got some basically Brendan Urie solo records out there, which I figured I'll bring this up. Technically, Panic at the Disco are on a break. Technically, they're over. I feel like they're probably done. I think if Brendan does come back, it's going to be out on a solo career at this point. I think at this point, it's safe to guess that the Panic name is kind of retired, as it should have been since 2013. But, anyways, my bottom record, I think pretty definitively at this point, it is the most recent one, Viva Las Vengeance. However, it actually grew on me a fair bit. I have it at 3 stars. I think it is a decent album. And I kind of like the direction here. Something I will give to Panic that I don't give to a lot of other bands, like say Fall Out Boy or My Chemical Romance, just say like their direct contemporaries, is I feel like every Panic record has its own identity. Every one of them is very unique and very different from one another. This one is more so like his glam pastiche. He's trying to be like spiritualizing, T-Rex or Bowie in a weird sense, but he's still bringing in the pop sensibilities and the theatrical qualities that were on his previous release. And I think at points it succeeds, at points it doesn't. I think that the title track and the first single, Viva Las Vengeance, is the best song that the band had did in a fair bit. I like it a lot. Middle of a Breakup is, I like it, although I will admit that chorus is very cringy. And I think that this is bar none the worst Panic record lyrically, well, which is interesting because you have a record such as Vices and Virtues, which is essentially Yuri's first attempt at songwriting at all. And I think pretty much every song, including the bonus tracks for that record, are better written than basically anything on this record. I think Local God is, again, a pretty good single, but there are some really weak numbers on here. Notably, Sad Clown, I think, is pretty bad. I also think tracks like Star Spangled Banner and God Killed Rock and Roll are not ideal. And I don't know. I like the sentimentality of a track like All by Yourself, but I think that is one of very few circumstances in which Yuri actually oversins, which is weird because he sings with this incredibly theatrical, flamboyant, sort of over the top vocal performances. But I think very, very rarely does he actually overdo it, which is kind of where I find it to be interesting with people that do say that, he's way too much. Because to me, I feel like if he sang it at any less of that style, it'd just the songs would fall pretty flat. Probably my favorites on here were Don't Let the Lights Go Down. I like that one a fair bit. And as well, I really enjoyed Say It Louder this go around. Overall, I think it's a pretty decent record. I think it's a little over long, but I think it's a good way for the band to end out, do a little bit more of the rock style that they'd been missing out on through their previous couple of records. And I don't know, it's not going to blow you away or anything, but I do think it is an all right listen. But I know that you feel slightly differently. And I will admit, you can definitely see some of the vocal strain that Yuri has been experiencing, especially live on this record. He's not quite at the level that he was even back in 2018 on Viva Las Vengeance, but even still, I like it a decent bit. It's a decent record. 3 stars for Viva Las Vengeance.
Okay. Viva Las Vengeance is also my number 7. I don't like it. It's 2 stars for me. Here's the problem with this record. I mean, there's a few, but the biggest thing here is this is Panic, quote unquote, Yuri trying a very sort of I mean, they're trying to capture a very, like you said, 70s rock influence. They're recording straight to tape, and the production style is very clean, very dry, and the vocals are very unsweetened, production wise. That to me is the problem. Now, I don't hold like, I have said all these positive things about Brendan Urie kind of at the start. I still stand by what I've said, that I think he is a naturally fantastically talented singer. However, like every pop singer does, I don't think this is a bad thing, but previous Panic records have benefited from vocal sweetening of some kind, whether that is literal auto tune, whether that is like a Meltdown type of like pitch correction thing, or just general effects to kind of clean up the sound and correct the pitchiness, which you're naturally going to get from singing in as high a register as he does. Um, like you listen to him live and unsweetened, and yeah, it sounds about like how this record sounds. Middle of a breakup, which you mentioned, I think that is like the prime example, or one of the prime examples of they're clearly not editing his voice, and good on them for trying that. But when he gets into his higher range in the choruses, it is often very noticeably out of tune. Um, and that's a problem because this album relies on his high range in a way that no other Panic record does consistently. Um, he's definitely playing the role of the diva here, if you will. And I don't think that's I don't think that's his style. I think he's a strong singer, but I don't know that he's quite at the level to do what he is doing on this record. There's a lot of Queen influences here, but Yuri's voice is naturally much smaller than Freddie Mercury's. Mercury had a very physical and massive presence in the studio, and Yuri doesn't have that. So, to my ears, when they try to do Queen as blatantly as they do here, it does not work at all. Um, Something about Maggie, I think, is like a very clear example of Queen mimicry that to me just does not work at all. Star Spangled Banner, fuck off. Uh, and no, there's there's pretty much nothing here that I would come back to. I do agree that the title track is um, pretty good. That's probably my favorite here, but I just I couldn't do it with this one. I get pretty positive on Panic pretty quickly after this record, but I did not feel like I was a better person for having caught myself up on this one. I have no desire to go back to it. It's 2 stars, significantly worse than any other Panic record, is what I will say, but pretty clearly at the bottom. So, yeah.
I get it. I get it. I will say, whenever I was first going into this, I had it at 2.5. It did grow on me with repeated listening, but I think it was more so just me almost, in a sense, rediscovering the band and sort of falling in love with them. I'll throw it out here because I ranked basically every Panic song. I've still never heard his version of Bohemian Rhapsody, and I don't plan to because I can't imagine it's all that great. But oh well. Number 6 for me, I'm actually already up at 3.5, although this one is a pretty shaky 3.5 stars. I have Pray for the Wicked from 2018. It's actually at one point, whenever I was first getting into the band, was my favorite Panic record. It's fallen a little bit though to number 6, so maybe a lot of it. And I think that this album is incredibly interesting. I think it's a ton of fun. This is by far the most overtly pop they had gone to this point, but he had recently worked on a musical, I believe it was called Kinky Boots, in which he played one of the leading roles, in which you can tell very much he was loving the big bands or orchestration and the big horn sounds, and that is plastered all across this record. Panic at the Disco, pretty consistently speaking, are if a theater kid made pop music, and I think that this is probably the most blatant example of that. I think that the opener, Fuck a Silver Lining, is absolutely fantastic. It is so much fun. One of the best, just straight ahead pop songs they ever made, despite the numerous F bombs, so it would never get played on radio. Woo! You got Sam and Saturday Night, which I think is really great. Hey Look Ma, I Made It, I think is the best example of an overt pop single, which wasn't the biggest song, because High Hopes followed it, in which I will say this about High Hopes. I think it is a well-constructed, it is a good pop song that I enjoy, but I would never choose to listen to outside of the record. Roaring Twenties, I think, is this really cool, almost like Western feeling to it at points. I think it's got this really cool, it's like whistling effect through it. I don't much care for him saying that he'll roll you a blunt because he wants to go home, but I mean, it's Panic at the Disco. As much as I love them, not the best band lyrically, but I think that they get by a lot of the time. I find far more offensive him claiming to be like MJ up in the clouds on Dancing's Not a Crime, which might be his worst lyric in general. Really awful stuff. I also don't think One of the Drunks is all that great. And this album might have my second least favorite Panic song in general, being Old Fashioned, which is where I think these sort of across this album, there is a light sort of trap influence in the production style, which makes sense for a modern pop album. And I think Old Fashioned just gets drenched in that style and it just ruins it. And it's why it's one of my least favorite Panic songs. Although I adore the song The Overpass. I think that one is so much fun. You get so much energy and bounce through it. And King of the Clouds, I think, is probably one of their better, sort of more atmospheric songs. I love these sort of, uh, I guess, angelic nature really is the best way to put it, and just sort of the ambiance through it. I think it closes out very well with the piano led ballad. They did it on the previous record as well with Impossible Year, but I think that this one has a bit more of Yuri's overt stamp and theatrical style on Dying in LA, which I think is another great vocal performance of his. I think it's a pretty fun pop album, and although it definitely has its highs and lows, I think at its highs, Fuck a Silver Lining, Hey Look Ma, and King of the Clouds, I think are really great pop songs. And ad score, I just think that's a really solid record. So I'm at 3.5 stars for Pray for the Wicked, a good album. My number 6.
We stay in sync. My number 6 is 2018's Pray for the Wicked. 3 stars. Bar none, the worst songs on any Panic record to this point, pretty clearly to me. I think
I would
this.
agree, but there's one massive exception that I will get to.
Okay, fair enough. I think a lot of these songs to me come across as this like kind of hollow set of pseudo reflective party anthems. Which maybe I'm downplaying it slightly, but and what I will give the record credit for is a fair few of the hooks are pretty solid. And at its high points make up some really strong pop singles from this era. Like to me, I think High Hopes is a strong pop song overall. A little bit derpy, I suppose, but I think it is absolutely saved by Yuri's voice. See, this is an example where I think Yuri sounds fantastic on this record. High Hopes is an example of that to me. Saturday Night, like you said, I think is great. Hey Look Ma, I Made It, I like. Really, it is mostly the singles on this record that make it for me. And then when you get to the album tracks, I don't find a lot that I want to revisit. I don't like One of the Drunks very much. I'm not a fan of King of the Clouds. Dying in LA, I don't know. Like it's kind of nice, but he's doing what to me, and I say this sincerely, sounds to me like a little Taylor Swift inflection in his voice when he does a little hiccup when he says dying in LA. Like that's a very Swift like thing to do, I think. So I don't know. I'm not crazy about that one. To me, the highlight on here, I don't know if it's the best song, but I do really like it, is The Overpass. Actually, no, if I'm being honest, that's probably the best song for me. I think the production matches the energy of the hook on this song better than any other track here. I think otherwise the production and the hook kind of like clash and one kind of overshadows the other, but here it just melds together really well. And I really like the effect. Reminds me of a lot of the best stuff from like Death of a Bachelor or something like that. But yeah, I'm not crazy about it as a record, but it has some solid moments. But I'm only at 3 stars. It's my number 6, but you look at the Rate Your Music ratings for this album and the last one, like Viva Las Vengeance, I can understand, but this one got absolutely torn apart on music rating websites when it came on. And I suppose in that sense, my rating has to be seen as a bit of a defense of it. So I'll take that.
Yeah, I have to agree. I think that people went way too hard on that record. Sure, it's the most overtly pop thing that the band had done up to that point, but for the most part, they succeed at the pop standpoint. And mind you, I do come at it from the perspective of absolutely loving this band, but I just simply don't get it. I think a lot of it probably had to do with overplay of like High Hopes and maybe me giving some sort of lasting disapproval. Although I don't know, was me before or after uh, this record came out? I want to say it was before.
It would have been after because Lover was 2019.
I thought Me was like an early single or something. I don't know. Me stinks though, so it is what it is. Um, this one might be a bit contentious because I see some people love this album. Mind you, to clarify, I'm already at 4 stars. I think that this next record is very good. I really like this band. I have Vices and Virtues, which I feel like this comes at a very perplexing era in the band. This is immediately after Ryan Ross leaves. That's his name? Yeah, we'll say that's his name. And I feel like we need to just address here how massive of a deal that is. Um, Ryan was the predominant songwriter. He was essentially the leader of the band at this point. Yuri was the front man. Ross was kind of who was pulling the strings, sort of dictating the musical direction. He's most of the reason why they shifted to the more Baroque, Beatle-inspired music upon Pretty Odd, and he wanted to continue that style, which Yuri and Spencer, who had more interest in pursuing more pop and more traditional rock inspired music, uh, denied against that, which caused a split in the group. Ryan did a solo record, not really a solo record, like a band effort with John Walker. Never heard it, didn't really care to. We'll probably listen to it after the fact. And this is really interesting because this is Yuri's essentially debut record as a songwriter. And I think he actually does fairly well, all things considered. Mind you, there's obviously some hiccups, which there were some hiccups earlier on, but I think that they were more consistently strong. On this record, I do think that it's a bit more corny in the songwriting, it's a bit more straightforward, but that's kind of to be expected because, to the best of my understanding, this is the first time Brendan Yuri ever really properly tried to do songwriting. So it is what it is. And I think that this record has a massive success rate. I think the Ballad of Mona Lisa is excellent. I adore Let's Kill Tonight. I think Hurricane is a really great pop song. Trade Mistakes is one that I've always adored. I think Sarah Smiles as well is incredibly good pop music. And Nearly Witch is a really cool, sort of unique cut on here. I think it's really the best vocal showcase you've had for Yuri up to this point, just sort of going all over the place, almost like borderline scatting at points in the background. It's really interesting. I will say, however, I'm not the biggest fan of whenever he tries to approach Ryan leaving the band and lyrical sentiments. The two most obvious points of that are Memories, which I think is very corny, very to the point, and really it could have done with a bit more nuance, but it gets the point across. It's a fun, catchy pop song. And The Calendar, which I love this song. I have always loved this song. I think it is an outstanding one from an arrangement standpoint, one of the best that they did on here. Lyrically, it's kind of stretching. It's definitely going a bit out there to get its point across, but I think it succeeds, generally speaking. The issue with this one is there's one song I've yet to talk about, and that's Ready to Go. I've never much cared for it. I get the appeal of it. It's their big sort of pop anthem, their biggest one up to this point, and it's fine, but it's just kind of too far in that direction for me at this point because they're still trying to be a rock band on this record, and I think that's where it falters. And I don't love the sequencing of it. I think Hurricane early on is a little weird. I don't really love where it always flows in the middle of it. And this shouldn't be a knock against the record itself, but I kind of have to knock it. The bonus tracks on this album are considerably better than most of the main album cuts for me. I adore tracks like Bittersweet, Turn Off the Lights, I Want to Be Free, Stall Me. I think that those are all excellent songs that if they were put on this album in place of something like Memories or Ready to Go or Always, I think it could have elevated it to maybe a 4.5 star record for me. But it's just they left these songs off. It is what it is. I don't blame them for doing so because they still made a very good album, in my opinion. But it could have been that much better. Hell, even just all fucking throw all 16 on there. I'm good for it. But I don't know. It's kind of arbitrary to put that against it. But knowing that those songs are out there, are from the same sessions, and are better written than some of the ones on there, I would have liked it. So, regardless, I still like this album a lot. I think Yuri sounds fantastic. This is when Gowan Weeks, formerly of the Brobecks, would join, and I think that he definitely does a lot for the musical direction. We'll get a ton of his synth pop influences on their following release, which we will talk about later. And yeah, I think it's a very good album, although there's just like sort of issues I have with it that are outside of the album itself. So it's kind of weird to discuss, but I still do like it a lot. And at 4 stars, Vices and Virtues, a very good record. Thank you.
You're welcome. Um, very interesting. We're still in sync. If Vices and Virtues is my number 5. Um, 3 stars still. Um, I could maybe with time be convinced to put this at 3.5, but I was not feeling it this time around. Um, Here is what I will say. Um, this is, I think you kind of mentioned this before, that this kind of seems like a record from a band that is made by a band that is really trying to find their footing after having a really major split. Feels like they're trying to kind of piece together something from the scraps that are left over. Um, what you said earlier about Brendan Urie's lyrics and kind of him, I mean, this really being kind of his first major attempt at carrying the load songwriting wise. Um, the lyrics definitely seem to be an attempt at imitating the writing style that Ross used in the previous couple of records. But it doesn't stick the landing for me because I think he's trying to make these over the top lyrical ideas fit really snugly into a pop hook. With Ross, I feel like he felt more comfortable kind of throwing caution to the wind and just kind of doing whatever the hell he wanted. Like, hey, I'm going to throw these lyrics out there. I'm going to write a melody around them and we're just going to kind of see what happens. And it fucking worked. But I feel like Yuri is trying to, I don't know. I don't know if it's that he's kind of like writing the hooks first and then trying to match the lyrics to that. But I, I don't think it really works very well. I was not very impressed by the match of lyrics and melody here. I really like the Ballad of Mona Lisa. I really like the Calendar. Those were the two clear highlights for me. Um, but a lot of everything else is doesn't entirely stand out. I also think this record is really hurt by its production. I don't like the production of this album at all. Um, it's very, very busy, very, very noisy. It does not have anything near the clarity of what came before it, certainly. And I would argue that what came after it is sharper, cleaner in a lot of ways. This one is just kind of loud. And I don't really like that, at least in this context. I don't think it works. Um, I don't really know where I'd rate Ready to Go on this album. I don't think it's an absolute highlight for me though. So I'm kind of with you on that one. And I can probably agree with like the sequencing being a little bit weird. I don't know. I think I could see this one growing on me more with time. And I mean, this is only the second time I've heard the record, but I if it does grow on me, it's going to be a bit of a slow burn because there's some big pet peeves that I have that are kind of embodied on here. But it's certainly you get the sense of where they are going to go afterwards, at least like the very formative aspects of like pop panic, if you will. Um, so it's 3 stars, probably on the stronger end of 3 stars, but not crazy about it. But again, we're continuing to get more positive as we go here.
Nice. You do say that you can definitely tell where they're going, but then they stylistically change everything around on the next record. So, like, you can tell that they're leaning into a pop landscape. I don't think that you would have initially expected such a plunge in the synth pop following it. But, anyways, next up, I feel like this is probably going to be your number 2, if I had to guess. I'm going with 2016's Death of a Bachelor, probably the album that grew on me the most. For the longest time, this was actually my least favorite or second least favorite Panic record, after initially being my first favorite when I was just getting into the band. So my ranking typically fluctuates with Panic. I will say my biggest issue with this record is Opening of Victorious. I don't like that song very much. I think it's kind of one of their weaker pop songs in general. I find the chorus to be a little obnoxious and it's just kind of overblown here, which is kind of my main issue with it. I think every other song on here is very good though, and I like them all a fair bit. Don't Threaten Me with a Good Time is a nice move into it. I like how I used to really not like Hallelujah, but I liked it a lot this go around. I love the Chicago sample. Same with Emperor's New Clothes, which I think is just a really fucking weird as shit song for the pop era. But it works really well. And from what I gathered, it like somewhat chart hit, which is really bizarre because it was a single, which is it's interesting. Death of a Bachelor, the title song, it's kind of him. If you know him, he has like a Sinatra tattoo. It's kind of him sort of embodying this sort of crooner, sort of loving style that he had. The good old trap hi-hat all across the back half of it that really mucks it up, which I think it works. It fills out the song very well, but it's like Really? You're trying to do this whole kind of like throwback swing sort of tune. You're just gonna have this massive ass track production, dude. Come on, be better. Crazy Equals Genius is a ton of fun. I love how he's like continuously moving through the members of the Beach Boys. I got knock points for not bringing up Bruce Johnston though. Pretty big loss there. Really unfortunate. LA Devotee might be the best pop song that the band ever wrote. It is just such an earworm. It gets in there, it gets stuck, and it's just got such bounce and such flavor to it. I love it. Golden Days, I think, is a bunch of fun. I sort of love his vocal progression through it and how he just soars at the end of it. Past that, it's kind of a decent sort of pseudo rock song, but for the most part, I'm really just there for the vocal build. The Good, the Bad, and the Dirty, it's good. I like it. I like most Panic songs, so it is what it is, but I do get why some people aren't as into that one. But really, the crowning jewel of this record for me is House of Memories, which I think is just so good. I love the sort of electronic style to it. You have these sort of, I don't even know how to describe this song because it is a pop song at its core, but I do think that it really goes all over the place. It kind of feels like a music video in a weird sense, to where you just get so much movement and so much sort of groove and bass movements all throughout. And I love Yuri's performance across it. I think this is also one of his better lyrical statements. And for whatever reason, the last thing that the band seemingly has put out at this point is an EP with this song, a sped up version of it, and a slowed down version of it. I don't think that this song charted or did that well ever, so I don't get that. But you do you, boo. And the final song on here, Impossible Year, I think is probably his best stance at just doing a straight ahead piano ballad. It's really lush. It's really beautiful. I think I like how it closes out. All in all, I just think that this is a really strong pop effort. I think that it's him tightening up his writing, sort of pivoting to more of a pop rock style, well, as pop rock as the 2010s could give you. Plenty of pretty solid pop tracks here, tons of great vocal performances. If you like Panic at the Disco, I mean, if you're fine with the pop stuff, there's something to deny here. 4 stars. It's a very good record. Death of a Bachelor.
All right. Let's see here. My number four, this is where we diverge. 2013's Too Weird to Live, Too Rare to Die. This is 3.5 stars, kind of a light 3.5, but I do think this is an improvement on Vices and Virtues, even if I do have some of the same critiques. It still does kind of sound like shit, but I think the very over the top and excessive production on here sits a bit better. And part of that is because this is the pop pivot, like you were mentioning. And I think this pivot, even if sonically there's not necessarily an enormous difference, there is a difference, but I wouldn't say it's earth shattering. I think the difference in the songwriting is so noticeable, and I can tell how much more comfortable Yuri sounds here. These, like, he's writing lyrics that fit the melodies better. And I think I don't know what to say. It's just it's strong in that sense of like these being straightforward like pop compositions. Casual Affair, I think, is an example of that's a song I like because I think that is something that I think later Panic records will also do well to some extent, where I think the overproduction serves the song rather than harms it. And again, there's one record that I have left off here, which we'll get to, that I think does that really well. Yeah, I love Nicotine. That might be my favorite song on the album. The two big singles, This Is Gospel and Miss Jackson, I think are both really strong. I don't know about Vegas Lights. I kind of like it. But it's not necessarily a favorite of mine. Far Too Young to Die, I like too. I think this is it's kind of funny because I think this is like one of the most omnipresent like Panic records. When I like talk to friends of mine who are like big Panic fans, this is usually the one that they'll bring up. So maybe this is a sign that like this is also going to be a bit of a grower with time for me. And maybe that means that I'll get over some of like the production critiques that I have. Because again, I think that's what hinders this album the most for me. But It's definitely creative. It's definitely a creative pop record in quite a few ways. And there are some very strong songs on here. So yeah, 3.5, I'd recommend it. And this is where things start to get really good really quickly, is what I will say.
A
So yeah.
grower that record is because it's almost my number two. It's my number three, Too Ready to Live, Too Ready to Die. And I will say for the longest time, this was my least favorite Panic record. I did not get it. I didn't like the synth pop direction. I thought that it sounded really lame, really cheap. I love it. I really love it now a lot. Um, I will say I'm not the biggest fan of This Is Gospel. I like it. I think it's pretty good. I'm not sure about it as an opener though. I think it's maybe a little much right off the top. I don't really know what else you'd open with on here. Miss Jackson, I do think is a really good one. That's one I've kind of been off and on about, but I do like it a lot. You probably didn't mention what I always assume is like the biggest one outside of the meme potential that This Is Gospel has, because that song fucking went crazy with memes. I feel like, which is Girls, Girls, Boys, which I mean, yay for gay. That's about all I can say. It's good, but yes, good for queer. Love it. But anyways, past that, I think that the deep cuts on here are what I'm really here for. I love tracks like "Girl That You Love" and "Casual Affair." The sort of crazy, over the top production, how it bleeds into these almost like really heavy for them sort of EDM breakdowns throughout the song. I think is crazy, really building up this great sense of atmosphere while still at its core being a really good pop song with something like "Girl That You Love." I think that this is a really excellent usage across this record of vocoder effects, except for the end of All Things, which is really bad. I don't like that one at all, especially because like those are your wedding vows, dude. You don't want to clean sing your wedding vows. You want to Daft Punk up those? Come on. Far Too Young to Die, I think, is a really great pop song. It's actually written by Down Weeks, and there is an original version by the Brobecks that has kind of like a surf rock swing to it. That's really cool, actually. I like it a lot. Pretty much the only good song the Brobecks ever did. As you said before, Nicotine is a great pop song. Vegas Lights as well, I'm kind of iffy on. I think it's good, but I don't love it. But my favorite song on here is Colorful. I think it might be the single best hook this band has ever written. I think it is just such a ungodly earworm. It just gets stuck. It gets stuck on my head all the time. I did my Panic list is legitimately my third favorite Panic at the Disco song. I love it so much. I think it is just an incredibly well made pop song. And really, that's sort of my stance on this as a whole. Knowing what Down Leaks would go on to do with I Don't Know How But They Found Me, you can definitely tell him sort of pulling the strings, getting Panic into the synth pop direction, which is where a lot of his influences come from. And I think that it's really well done. I think that Yuri, like you were saying, he really finds his footing as a writer. And really, just across the board, it becomes a much tighter, a much better overall produced record, I would say, as well. I really enjoy it. I was tempted to go 4.5, but it's only 32 minutes long, and there are a couple of tracks on here that I'm not in love with. So I'm only at 4 stars for it, but still a very good record that I could listen to at any point. Too Rare to Live, Too Rare to Die by Panic at the Disco.
All right. My number three is going to be 2005's A Fever You Can't Sweat Out. I debated between going a strong 3.5 and a light 4, and I'm going to be generous and go a light 4. Um, and this is a strong compliment because that is probably about where this style of like emo pop rock music caps for me. I think this is about as good as this genre gets to my ears. Um, I think it's just melodrama that's done really well. As well as Lord did it. No, but I digress.
I like
Uh,
this album way more than Melodrama.
I do not. The the very like hyper descriptive song titles and lyrics are very of their time, very clearly of their time. But I think they almost feel more over the top than some of their contemporaries. And I do tend to think that's a good thing because they play into that cheese a little bit. And I think that um, that helps it age better. That helps it kind of endure some of the memeing and the critiquing that stuff on this record has gotten over the years. I like the electro pop influences in here. I'm not very big on the auto tune on Nails for Breakfast, Tax for Snacks. I don't think that works very well. But I do like the little kind of glimpses of it here and there. Um, Melodies across the board are really strong. I think they nailed that right from the start. Just very tight, very sharp. Just they nailed it. Um, the best song on here to me is the plebeian pick, if you will. I write sins, not tragedies, because to me, I think that if we were talking about just a straight through song where verse and chorus really match up well, there's like dynamics and stuff like that. I think it's the strongest blend of everything. I think a lot of the other songs on here have a verse that is really strong or a chorus that's really strong, but not necessarily both, or they don't necessarily work in tandem. And to me, that's just indicative of, hey, these guys are still pretty raw as songwriters. Um, but I Write Sins Not Tragedies to me just nails that merger so well. The lyrics I think are really fun, and I think Yuri's vocals on there are awesome. I really like Camisado. I constantly thank God for Esteban. Build God, then we'll talk. Quite a few highlights on this album. And of course, this raises the interesting question, how does this compare to like the best of someone like, say, Fall Out Boy? I'll open that door here. And I think the answer for me, I I struggle. I don't know if I prefer this to any Fall Out Boy record. Not to any. I misspoke there. I don't know if I prefer any Fall Out Boy to this record. I certainly fucking prefer this to like Mania or some shit. Like that's awful. But in any case, it's a strong record, and I think it's probably among the best product of a scene that is easy to make fun of, but I think genuinely has contributed some really strong, really great music. And I think this one will age better than pretty much anything else from that time period. So light 4 stars for A Fever You Can't Sweat Out.
Okay. I have some comments there. It is my number 2. It would be my number 1 if not for 2 things. One, even though I like it, probably their most dated record production wise, which is kind of a point that I disagree with. I think some of the electronic elements feel a bit cheesy lyrically. You can definitely tell it's very 2005. And 2, Now It's for Breakfast, Tax for Snacks. That is the worst song in their career. The vocal production is terrible. It ruins the song. I think it's by far the worst lyrically on the record as well. It's just the only track on this record that I think is bad, and I think it is the worst song that they did. So legitimately, if you take that out and you probably remove the intermission, or at least trim it down to just the first half of it, this could be a 5-star album for me. I love every other song to an intense degree, but those 2 things really knock it down. However, I think that I love the sort of carnivale, sort of weird, almost theatrical quality to it. I think that this is kind of where it differs from a band like Fall Out Boy and a band like My Chemical Romance, is they never really ever have that punk infusion, that sort of like very loose punk tinge to them. They are very much, I feel, more so planted within pop rock and alternative rock on this record than any of those other groups ever did. Um, Obviously, there's a way the electro pop, as you mentioned, which I like it a lot. I think it's best showcased, of course, on Time to Dance, which I think is a very good song. I love the opening punch of The Only Difference Between Matrodom and Suicide's press coverage. I think that song is excellent. I think it keeps up tempo very well with London Becken's songs about, let me open up my Spotify full things here. London Becken's songs about money written by machines, I think is a really great way to continue it. As you said before, Camisado, that is my favorite Panic song. I love it to death. It is a 5-star song. And I think Lying is the most fun a girl can have without taking her clothes off. It's a really great way to sort of end out. If it was on a record, I feel like that'd be a great way to end side 1, just sort of flip it back over. I think it's a really fun, really sleazy song in a sense. But It's Better If You Do, I think, is a slightly better version of this track that follows. I Write Sins Not Tragedies, which I like that song. I like it a lot. I don't really get why it became sort of the stamp of the universe at the time, but I do like it a lot. It's a very good song. And it's pretty good. I chime in with Haven't You People Ever Heard of Closing the Goddamn Doors? That is some hot topic bullshit right there, and I love the hell out of it. But the closing couple of songs, I constantly thank God for Esteban, is great. And There's a good reason these tables are numbered, honey. You just haven't thought of it yet. I think is so much fucking fun. I love it a lot. It is possibly the just most fun song in the entire catalog for me. I love just the wittiness and the sarcasm Yuri brings into it. When he brings up like the cyanide pills, it's just so good. He just feels like a fucking sociopath, which he probably is, all things considered, what we know about Yuri, and I love it. Thank you, man. And then the closer, Bill God Then We'll Talk, I think is really excellent. Just really gets across the board. Shout out to Dylan Seeby, who said he wouldn't listen to the record because of the song titles. I said every one of them for you. Don't worry. I think it's a very strong record. It is borderline 5 stars for me. There's just some very noticeable faults. I've been really debating between 4.5 and 4 because I really don't like Meals for Breakfast, Tax for Snacks. And I think the intermission drags. I'm gonna go a low 4.5 stars. I do think it's a great record, but it has 5 potential. If just like they just cut off that one song, it's a 5 for me. It's their best record, but I still love it. Still think it's great. 4.5 stars. Thank you, Mr. Ross. Smile.
All right. My number 2 is 2016's Death of a Bachelor, as you correctly predicted several minutes ago. This is, for me, a very strong 4 stars. This is a very strong 4 stars. There's a comment that someone made, and I don't have the username in front of me at this point, but someone on Rate Your Music said that this record is like if Baz Luhrmann made a pop album, which I think is the perfect description. Now, and I, for the record, have not seen Moulin Rouge, but I have seen Baz Luhrmann's version of The Great Gatsby, as well as his film Elvis, and I loved both of them. So this type of over-the-top production, yes, I criticized other records for being over the top and being very loud in previous albums that we discussed. But I think this record really succeeds because of how clean it sounds. Like, yes, it is noisy. Yes, there is a lot going on constantly, but it is bright. It sounds crisp. It sounds good. And it's so just engaging. You're sucked in at first. Victoria's has a very obnoxious like hook to it. So yeah, probably not the best way to start the record on some levels, but I am going to fully admit that that is the closest thing to a guilty pleasure panic track that I have. Like, it should annoy me, but it doesn't. Of course, at this point, Brandon Urie is the only creative presence in the band, really. And so this is his album in every sense. And that begins and ends with his voice, which to me feels like it takes a quantum leap here compared to previous records. I think he sounds phenomenal on this album. And if people were to ever question my statement of saying Yuri is the best male pop singer of the last 20 years, I'd point them to damn near every song on this record and say, no, sorry. I mean, take a listen to this, take a listen to that. I mean, he sounds phenomenal on this record. Some really sharp pop songs. Am I going to go so far as to say they're some of the best pop songs of the 2010s? Not quite, but they're really well done. I really like Hallelujah, like I said, with like you said, with the Chicago hook. I think that's the Chicago sample, I think, is very effective. The title track's actually what got me into Panic in the first place. That's probably the first song that I really, really liked. Do I get Sinatra out of it? Kind of. I know that's what he was going for. Yeah, there you go. I know that's what Yuri was going for, but it is a very like, again, it's sort of like the Gatsby-esque version of Sinatra that is just very like over the top. But I think it works super effectively. Emperor's New Clothes, fantastic vocals from Yuri on there. Crazy Equals Genius, yes, correct. Shout out to Bruce Johnston. even syllables wise, his name would have fit in there. So it's a wasted opportunity. Um, but yeah, really, really fun hook, really over the top. LA Devotee, very catchy. One of his best earworms, I think, for sure. Um, it's just it's all over the place, but it's so engaging. And Yuri is absolutely like belting his ass off on so many of these songs. It's not for everybody by any means, because Baz Luhrmann isn't for everybody. And dare I say it, that there's probably no pop record I can think of off the top of my head that would define the word overstimulation more than this one. No good pop record, I should say. But this is really well done to me. Probably Brendan Urie's finest hour in a lot of ways. In fact, I would say definitely his finest hour. And I have no qualm saying, yeah, it's a very strong 4 stars. And if I were to get into some of the album tracks, could even be a 4.5. I think it's that strong. So yeah, love it.
Yeah, I was going to say that you can't ignore Bangers by Miley Cyrus's amount of overstipulation. That one really excels there.
This is true.
But yes, we're going to work together to make a version of Crazy Equals Genius that respects our Disney girls lord, Bruce Johnston. Best Beach Boys song. Love you. Anyways, time for the best Panic album. We agree. Pretty odd. I mean, it's kind of hard to even deny it. It's just their best set of songs at a base level. This is probably one of the bigger stylistic leaps from one album to another too. You get this weird sort of electro pop alternative rock flair to essentially a 2000s version of the Zombies or the Kinks. People bring up the Beatles, but it's far more adjacent to the sort of Baroque, more music hall style that people were doing around that time. And it's surprisingly excellent. Like, if you would have pegged me to say what Panic were more likely to turn into, a Baroque pop band or a death metal band, I'm probably more likely to lean towards the latter. This just feels like such a pivot to me. And the fact that they do it so brilliantly is really what shows off. Obviously, the initial single, Night in the Afternoon, I like it. Probably within my bottom half of songs on this record, but I still think it's very good. And it's a really good introduction to this sound. She's a Handsome Woman, I think, is gorgeous. Do you know what I'm seeing is amazing. That Green Gentleman was my second favorite Panic song. I think it's the perfect blending of sort of an upbeat, sort of bumping nature to it in tandem with the sort of really lush and gorgeous ornate style. I Have Friends in Holy Spaces, less than 2 minutes long. It's just really gorgeous. Northern Downpour is possibly their finest moment from a lyrical standpoint. It's just so vivid in the imagery and just gorgeous. I love the sort of over the top theatricality of a track like Pas de Cheval. The piano, Something I Don't Know, is probably my third favorite on here. It's just amazing. I think that's another really great one where the imagery is really divine and the sort of Baroque stylings really bleed into each other well. Behind the Sea, one of the lone lead vocal performances by Ryan Ross, and it really showcases that he could have done this on his own. Mind you, he obviously isn't the singer of Yuri, but I think that he really has a really cool quality to him that's kind of like in that emo realm, but it does have like this sort of old timey, sort of really gentle style to it that I really enjoy. And the underrated gem in the entire Panic at the Disco catalog to me is Folkin' Around. This weird 2 minute sort of like pastiche upon country music, which is maybe a top 5 Panic song for me. I think it is incredible. I love the vocal performance. I think that this is some of the wittiest, most sort of jaunty lyrics that they ever did. I think it is just so much fun, especially like the little banjo flair I think is in there. It's so good. I love it. She Had the World as well, another really beautiful track. I do admit the two closing numbers I think are notably weaker than the rest of the album. I don't love From a Mountain in the Cabin on the Woods or whatever Justin Timberlake record it was. I think Mad as Rabbits is kind of a closer. It was my favorite for a while, but it's really grown off me in time. I still love this album. I think every song is at least 4 stars. They're all very, very well made. It's a really great pivot, and I think it suits Yuri far better than it has any right to, leading even stronger credence to your argument about how versatile he is, which is really what I want to cap this review off. and sort of just sentiment as a whole on. Panic at the Disco very often get really pigeonholed into that sort of emo pop punk realm, which I don't think they ever were a part of. The debut is kind of an alt rock, sort of electro pop album. The second one is Baroque pop. The third one is pop rock. The fourth one is synth pop. The fifth one is overt pop. The sixth one, you can make a claim, is kind of like a theatrical sort of musical. Not music hall. You could make a claim for it being this sort of theatrical, sort of show tuney record. And the last one is basically glam rock. I think every single album of theirs has their own identity. They're very separated from one another. If you took a random song from A Fever You Can't Sweat Out, popped on Vices and Virtues, took Vices and Virtues, put it on Too Weird to Live, took Viva Las Vengeance, put it on Pretty Odd, it just wouldn't work because all of their albums have a very unique and defined identity, which really just goes to show how unique of a band I think that they are. I think that they don't get nearly enough credit as they deserve. I think that they're a really great band. I think that their pinnacle of an artist is the album Pretty Odd, which I have 4.5 stars. I think it is a great record. Number one.
All right. Yeah, Pretty Odd, which I also have at 4.5. As you said, Panic doing Baroque pop seems like a very bizarre fit on paper. Certainly, if your frame of reference is only the first album, even more so if your frame of reference is literally everything else they did. But it makes more sense when you realize that this is very much Ryan Ross's like contribution to the band. This is his moment to shine. I also have not checked out any of his stuff after he left Panic, but after hearing this record, I'm very intrigued. Yuri, as like a songwriter and as a musician, I mean, kind of the common theme that we've talked about in so many of these other records is he has a lot of excesses. He is very dramatic. And I wouldn't say that Yuri's more dramatic flair is tempered here per se, but I think it takes a sort of new form. It transforms itself and merges into these songs that Ross is writing and these arrangement styles. And I think it works really effectively. A lot more cabaret influence here, building off some elements of the debut. You definitely get some kind of cabaret vibes in a couple of songs off the debut. And because of that, really drawing that sort of like eye roll comparison to Sgt. Pepper's. Although I do agree with you that the Kinks seems much more apt for what they're doing here. I do actually hear a bit of like Wondermints in these arrangements, a bit of Brian Wilson's That Lucky Old Son. The backing vocals may not be as sharp as the backing vocals on that record, but they really have nailed that sort of like multi-tracked, filtered sounding 60s aesthetic. And damned if I know how they did it, but again, all credit to Ryan Ross. I think he and probably Yuri as well seem like clear, like devotees, if you will, to this sound and this era. And you can tell they understand what they're doing and they understand how to construct a 60s pop song. Yeah, 9 in the afternoon, great lead off track. Really, really like it. Do you know what I'm seeing? To me, isn't like an all-timer of a melody dancing over this just really lovely chord progression. I adore that song. My favorite track, I'm kind of torn. It could be that one. I might say Northern Downpour for that one. I think that is just fantastic. Or potentially the piano knows something I don't know with that lovely little orchestral coda at the end of it. But really, all of it just feels like it's interesting because it feels like what a sort of like 60s tribute band would do in some ways, but done well, but done with like fresh, through a fresh creative lens. And containing enough relevance to like modern pop rock tropes and ideas to keep it relevant and not make it sound dated. And that's such a tricky balance to find. I mean, that's one of those things where you kind of just have to take a shot in the dark, and somehow they, you could argue they stumbled into it. I would argue it's just that they executed it exceptionally well. And I think this really proves, I think, to speak more to what you were saying, how strong of musicians, how strong of a band Panic was, how strong of musicians Rossi clearly is and Yuri clearly is. And yeah, I don't have much more to say about it, honestly. I think it's one of the best imitations of 60s sound that I've heard maybe ever. And it's not quite at 5 stars for me, but the fact that I can't really rule it out potentially getting there at one day in the future because of how sharp everything is a pretty fucking high compliment. So 4.5 stars, number one, pretty oddball record in their catalog for sure, but we are all the better for it.
It's really just an oddball record and just general of music. I mean, it's like if Fall Out Boy decided to throw together their R&B soul record. Well, anyways, any closing remarks you got on Panic? Or I think that we've kind of
Yeah, I think we've covered a lot of it. I think really just Panic is a band that I think has been sort of run through the meat grinder of internet music criticism, as quite a few pop acts and pop artists have been. And I think, especially now that we are talking about Panic in the past tense, and I agree that I don't think Yuri is going to, like, I think at most we're going to get like a reunion tour in like 15 years or something. Um, but I don't think they're ever going to do another album under this name. I think Yuri will probably do solo stuff or other projects or something. But at least for the time being, we're talking about them in the past tense. And I think because of that, I feel like that will naturally cause people to reflect more over the coming years about their legacy. And even if you could argue that they didn't necessarily play a super strong role in changing the direction of pop music, um, I think it's certainly very difficult for me to believe that they didn't contribute in their own way in a very strong sense. I think they have an important place in the last 20 years of pop music. And I think that's going to become more apparent over time, as it always does with these types of things. But yeah, I think time will be kind to this band, is my prediction.
that being said, I really hope that you enjoyed this discussion. Panic are a band that I hold very closely, but I do understand why people don't like them. But if you're gonna dislike them, let's give Yuri some credit. I mean, from a purely technical standpoint, his voice is just outstanding. I get that he can piss you off with, existing and as well how he sings, but typically existing. But I don't know. I think there's a lot of skill there, a lot of talent, and I love this band a lot. Big, big artist for me. Hope that you all enjoyed this and you have a great one.